It was the first time stepping into a bar after turning 22. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of music. The air smelled of alcohol and cheap cologne, a mix of excitement and recklessness. A friend had accompanied me that night, already tipsy before we even reached the entrance. His enthusiasm was contagious, but I stayed cautious, knowing my limits. Settling at the bar, a girl appeared out of nowhere. Her presence was magnetic, and her hair, a vivid, unnatural shade of red, stood out in the dim lighting. She introduced herself casually, weaving her way into our conversation with ease. The way she carried herself made it clear she was used to attention. At first, it seemed like she was merely enjoying the night, laughing at jokes, lightly touching my arm or my friend's shoulder. But something about her felt off, a little too eager, a little too insistent. Drinks arrived, but not by my doing. She offered to buy them, brushing off any protests. The drinks kept coming, and my friend, already drunk, accepted them without hesitation. I sipped mine cautiously, unsure whether she was just generous or had an ulterior motive. Eventually, my friend left for the bathroom and never returned. Bouncers had kicked him out for being too drunk, leaving me alone with her. Outside, she stood beside him, insisting he should come with her. My friend could barely hold himself upright, his words slurred beyond comprehension. There was no way I would let him leave with someone he barely knew, especially in that state. Refusing to back down, I stayed by his side. She continued to push, her tone shifting subtly, her patience thinning. Something was off. The more she insisted, the stronger my unease grew. Finally, realizing she wasn't going to get her way, she turned her attention fully to me. With my friend now out of the picture, she urged me to come with her, promising more drinks, a more exciting end to the night. The persistence unsettled me, but curiosity won over caution. I agreed to go, but something in my gut told me to stay alert. The car ride was quiet, but she kept handing me the bottle. The more I drank, the more I realized how calculated her actions were. She took only small sips, always keeping control, while encouraging me to down more. Pretending to go along with it, I discreetly poured out my share whenever she wasn't looking. She believed I was more intoxicated than I was, which gave me an advantage. When we reached her place, everything felt too smooth, too easy. The front door was unlocked, as if expecting someone. A chill ran through me as I stepped inside. Something about the place felt too quiet, too staged. As she locked the door behind us, my unease deepened. Excusing myself to the bathroom, I took the moment to clear my head. Splashing cold water on my face, I stared at my reflection. My instinct screamed at me that something wasn't right. Then, barely audible over the running sink, I heard hushed voices. She was speaking to someone. A male voice responded. The words weren't clear, but the tone was enough to confirm my fears. They were planning something. Taking a deep breath, I listened closely. The red-haired girl, if she was even the same girl, said something about me being too drunk to fight back. My pulse quickened. She had been waiting for this moment. But for what? Robbery? Something worse? Stepping out of the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of movement. She disappeared into another room, but something was off. It wasn't just her. It was someone else. The bright red hair vanished behind a door, and when she emerged again, her face looked slightly different. The realization hit like ice water. It wasn't the same girl. It was another woman wearing the same red wig. A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't a coincidence. This was planned. The woman in front of me was different, yet everything about her movements mimicked the first girl perfectly. I forced myself to remain calm, acting as if I was still oblivious. Forcing a sluggish movement, I excused myself back to the bathroom, pretending to be too drunk to notice the switch. Inside, the whispers resumed, more urgent now. The male voice had returned. They were waiting for something, waiting for me to stumble into the trap they had set. Heart pounding, I assessed my options. The only escape was the window. Without hesitation, I climbed out, landing hard on the grass below. Ignoring the pain, I ran. I didn't stop to look back. Cutting through the backyard, jumping over fences, I sprinted until I reached a main road, lungs burning with adrenaline. A convenience store glowed in the distance like a beacon. Rushing inside, I planted myself in front of the security cameras, knowing they were recording. Catching my breath, I called for a taxi, never once looking behind me. Only when I was safely inside the car, driving away from that house, did I dare to let the full weight of what had just happened sink in. Even now, years later, I think about that night. Who were those people? What were they planning? They spent money on drinks, on a taxi for my friend. None of it made sense if it was just a robbery. The red-haired girl, the switch, the whispered conversations. Something else was going on. And whatever it was, I was never meant to leave that house. This happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, but I still remember it vividly. Even now, it gives me chills. I grew up in a row of townhouses, 4 units connected side by side. Each of us had a small backyard with a patio, separated from a narrow road by a short wooden fence. The road was frequently used by neighbors for their evening strolls, so it was normal to see people passing by. But what wasn't normal was seeing someone standing on my patio. At that time, I usually came home from school an hour before my mom finished work. Since we lived only a short walk from school, she trusted me to be alone for that hour. Every day, I'd come home, lock the front door, double-check that the back door leading to the patio was locked, and then rush upstairs to my room to squeeze in as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and made me do homework. That day, I was doing just that when I heard a strange sound outside my window. My room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the backyard and the road beyond it. The sound was high-pitched, almost like a cat meowing. My heart jumped. My cat had been missing for months, and for a second I thought, maybe he finally came back. Excited, I ran downstairs, but the moment I stepped into the living room and looked outside, my body froze. There was a man on my patio. He was tall, with long black hair hanging over his face, almost hiding his eyes. His mouth moved strangely, making those eerie, high-pitched noises, and then I saw it. His lips and chin were stained with something dark. His hands dug into the ashtray on our patio table. And then, I saw him put something in his mouth. He was eating my dad's used cigarettes. My body locked up in fear. He kept chewing, his face twitching slightly. I couldn't move. My breath hitched. Then, as if my body finally snapped back to reality, I let out the loudest scream I could, but the man didn't react. He just kept eating from the ashtray, making those awful noises. I bolted. I ran upstairs, slammed my door shut, and locked it. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and called my mom. Through panicked sobs, I told her what was happening. She called the police immediately. I crawled under my blanket, my whole body shaking, trying to block out the horrifying sounds coming from the patio below. It felt like forever before I finally heard voices outside. The police had arrived. Peeking through my window, I saw 2 officers, 1 man and 1 woman standing by my fence. But I couldn't see the man anymore. He was directly below my window, out of my view. One of the officers called out to him, telling him to step away from the patio. The strange noises got louder. Then suddenly, there was an ear-piercing scream, followed by chaos. The man lunged. I heard a thud. The female officer had been knocked to the ground. The male officer immediately fired his taser, and the man collapsed, shaking violently, but he still kept screaming. Even as they struggled to handcuff him, his body writhed with unnatural strength. Eventually, they restrained him. By then, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. An elderly woman from next door took me in while the officers waited for my mom. They loaded the man into their car and drove off, but they promised they would return to explain everything. That night, an officer sat with my mom and me. He told us the man had severe autism. He had escaped from a care facility about 5 kilometers away. And then, the most shocking part, he used to live in our house. 5 years ago, his mother, his sole caregiver, had died, and he had been forced to leave. The house had been his entire world. When he escaped, he wasn't just wandering aimlessly. He was coming home. I felt a deep chill. This man had once lived within these walls, had once called this place his safe space. And even after all these years, he had found his way back. The officer assured me that the facility would ensure this never happened again. It took a few sleepless nights, but life eventually returned to normal. The years passed, and I never saw him again. Until last year. By then, my parents had moved out, and I had bought the house from them. It was just me now. One quiet morning, I was enjoying my coffee on the patio when I noticed someone standing by my fence. A man. His hair had turned gray, but the moment I heard those familiar high-pitched noises, my stomach dropped. It was him. For a second, I panicked. Was he going to hurt me? Would he jump the fence and charge at me like he did that police officer? My heart pounded, but then something in me shifted. 16 years had passed. He wasn't here to hurt me. He was here for the same reason he was before. He was looking for home. Taking a deep breath, I carefully gestured toward the patio. "Do you want to come down?" The moment I said it, he jumped the fence. I tensed, bracing for impact. But instead of attacking, he simply smiled. A big, innocent, childlike smile. I motioned for him to sit. He didn't respond. I asked if he wanted to come inside. He started laughing. And then, without hesitation, he stepped through the door. His face lit up the moment he entered. His eyes scanned the room as if he were remembering something. Slowly, he walked to the couch, sat down, picked up the remote, and switched to the cartoon channel. I watched him, stunned. For the first time in 16 years, he was home. I let him watch for a while, just letting him enjoy the moment. Then, realizing what I had to do, I called the facility. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. It took a lot of convincing, but eventually he got up. Tears rolled down his cheeks as they led him back to the car. I couldn't stop thinking about him after that. 2 days later, I called the facility. We made an arrangement. His name is Sam, and now, every Sunday, Sam and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They say it's the highlight of his week, and honestly, it's one of the highlights of mine too. 16 years ago, he terrified me. But now, I consider Sam my friend. I was about 9 years old. My sister, around 12. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up from the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked on oil rigs back then, sometimes gone for months, so most of the time it was just the three of us in the house. The house was old, sitting on the edge of town where the forest started. It had 2 floors, and the upstairs was where all the bedrooms were. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our mom's bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left led to my sister's room. The opposite end of the hall was my room, directly across from the upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway were doors with glass panes. We always kept them locked and almost never used them. The door near my room led to a small balcony that overlooked our front yard, and the door near my sister's room opened to a back porch that extended into the woods. The house leaned slightly into a hill, so from the back, the second floor wasn't very high off the ground. My sister and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I knew because I was a light sleeper, and they always flushed with the door wide open. I usually fell back asleep without much thought. But one night, my sister stopped outside my room before heading to her own. She hesitated, then turned back toward the bathroom, mumbling, "I should go now before I get too scared later. The last few nights, I've been too freaked out to walk down the hall. I keep seeing a man in stripes standing at the end of it." My mom didn't react much, either too tired to process it, or assuming my sister was making up ghost stories to scare me. I, however, was terrified. From that night on, I started running from the stairs to my bedroom, too afraid to look at the end of the hallway or out the windows. For weeks, the fear sat in my chest like a stone. I started having bad dreams about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a shadowy figure standing by the glass doors, watching me. Sometimes, I dreamt that the door to the balcony had been left unlocked, and when I turned to check, I'd see the handle slowly twisting. One evening, just before sunset, I was outside playing in the yard when I got this strange feeling. A prickling sensation crawled up my neck, and I felt like I was being watched. I turned towards the house and froze. A figure was standing behind my sister's upstairs window, partially hidden by the curtain. The sinking sunlight caught the faint outline of a face, but before I could process what I was seeing, the curtain shifted and the figure was gone. I ran inside, breathless, but when I told my mom what I saw, she brushed it off, saying it was probably just my reflection in the glass or a shadow from a tree. But I knew what I saw. Years later, when I was about 20, my mom and I were reminiscing about our old house while driving through town. The topic of our old dog, Max, came up. We laughed about how he used to chew up our shoes and escape from the yard. Then, out of nowhere, my mom said, "Do you remember the time I had to let the police inside? And Max ran straight to the kitchen and tore open that giant bag of dog food?" I stared at her, completely confused. In all the years we lived in that house, I didn't remember ever calling the police. My mom's face shifted like she had just realized she'd said something she hadn't meant to. "Oh, that's right. I never told you. You were too young at the time." One night, I woke up to a noise outside my window, and when I looked, there was a man standing there staring in at me. She explained how, the moment she turned on the light, he took off running. She grabbed my dad's gun and called the cops. I remember describing him to the officers. A tall man, wearing a striped shirt, dark hair. They told me he matched the description of a guy they were searching for. He had escaped from prison not long before that. He was in for murder. It took a moment for her words to sink in. The weight of what she was saying settled over me like a heavy blanket. My sister had seen him. She had been seeing him night after night, standing at the end of our hallway, watching us, observing our routine, for weeks. And we had no idea.